Over the last few weeks, we've seen more and more harrowing images coming out of Gaza. The United Nations has warned that the hunger crisis in the region is reaching dire levels. As pressure mounts from governments, news and aid organisations, we'll discuss what's happening with the latest ceasefire negotiations on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and for this episode I'm joined by two good friends of the podcast, because here with me on the Newscast sofa is Lyse Doucet. Hi, Lyse.
Oh, this is getting to be a regular appearance.
Well, there's a lot happening in the world.
Yes.
And also joining us from Washington is my Americast cousin, Anthony Zurcher. Hello, Anthony.
Hello from Washington.
Right, Lyse, last time we spoke, we were talking about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but since then we had that statement signed by a whole load of charities, NGOs and other organisations just saying how bad that situation had got.
Now they're talking about mass starvation, saying that the situation has never been so dire, that the population of Gaza is at catastrophic levels of hunger. Every day we wake up to the latest reports that more people have died of not having enough to eat. And the situation has evolved that not only are the people that the aid agencies are hoping to help if they were allowed to distribute aid in the way they did before, but even the people working for them, the aid workers themselves, are becoming too weak to work. And we've heard too that the Palestinian journalists who've been struggling, really in a life and death situation way, trying to take care of their families, trying to cover the news, they have also been reporting that they are too weak now. They're surviving on salt and water. But even though the stories are mounting, the statistics are getting worse, Israel continues to say that if there is a shortage, it is a man-made shortage, and it is the fault of Hamas, and it is the fault, they say, of the aid agencies' refusal to work with the new Israeli and American-backed food distribution system. But by all accounts, including what was that most strongly worded statement yet from the United Kingdom, 27 other countries, it's simply not working. Those countries described it in the strongest language they've ever used as a dangerous system, which was only drip feeding the population.
And just to remind newscasters, this is this new system that was put in place a few weeks ago, where there's only a certain number of hubs and people who want aid have to go there, queue for quite a long time. It's quite chaotic. Quite a lot of people have been shot while queuing. And that's been kind of roundly condemned by lots of the aid agencies. And yeah,
there's a growing chorus on the ground in capitals around the world. The EU is now warning that, in its words, all options are on the table if more food does not get into Gaza. And they are saying the system just isn't fit for purpose. We discussed this before, Adam, just to remind our listeners, the old system run by the United Nations had 400 distribution points. It was community-based, a system which had been working for decades. The new system on good days has 4 distribution points, on bad days 1 distribution point, and that's for more than 2.1 million people living in Gaza. There's not enough food to distribute, and there's not enough distribution points, and to reach those areas, the Palestinians have to go through conflict zones where there are Israeli soldiers, and it has been described as a death trap.
We've been talking about various statements, whether it's by governments or aid organisations and other charities. There was a statement today, quite unusual, from lots of journalistic organisations, yes, including the BBC. Just talk about that.
I think for a long time, there's been growing concern about the unprecedented number of Palestinian journalists who've been killed during this war, now in its 21st month. Israel often says that they are targeting terrorists, but time and again, media organizations worldwide say that journalists are being killed in Gaza at record numbers. Now the story is that the journalists themselves are starving. The Agence France-Presse, the French news agency, this week put out a very strongly worded statement saying that they have had situations in the past where their correspondents died in gunfire, died in other circumstances covering conflicts, but never before have some of their reporters have they died of hunger. And they warned that if immediate action is not taken, the last journalist will die of hunger. And so other media organizations, including the BBC, have joined forces because there's concern for all of the journalists based in Gaza, because they are living and working in Gaza, worried about their families, worried about coverage, and working. It has now become a life and death situation. There were these images about the journalists gathered together around in a tent, and they were drinking water and salt, and videos of them collapsing, too weak to continue to work.
And life and death became very clear on The World at One today on Radio 4 when they spoke to Dr. Nada Al-Haditi, who is a plastic surgeon who's just got back from Gaza a couple of weeks ago. And she talked to our colleagues at WATO about the situation at the Nasser Hospital, which is in southern Gaza, where she'd been based. And just to warn you, there are some upsetting details in this little bit of audio we're going to listen to.
We'd frequently carry patients across from the trolley onto the operating table, and kids that are 8, 10, 12 years old should be weighing 40 kilograms plus. All I can feel are bones. Their humeral width, their upper arm is the same width as their wrists. I can feel their bones through their skin. And as a consequence, their wounds are breaking down, their grafts are failing, and they're completely infested with infection and maggots because they have no ability to cope with the degree of injury inflicted upon them, and because they don't have the building blocks to heal.
Lyse, is there any kind of optimism around the world that actually there's a situation in a couple of days' time where people aren't that malnourished?
There's no sense in which either side is backing down. Israel defends its aid distribution system. The United States so far, when I know Anthony Zurcher will be able to tell us about that, when White House spokespersons are asked, or State Department spokesperson, they say that an aid delivery system is in place. The most important objective is to feed the people, but also to ensure it's not diverted by Hamas. The aid agencies repeatedly say there has been no large-scale diversion by Hamas, even though their system is not perfect. It couldn't be in a very, very imperfect situation such as Gaza and the chaos where so many people are so hungry. Literally, they besiege the convoys, and they've been besieging any a distribution site. And the United Nations, other aid agencies continue to say they cannot, they have to stand by humanitarian principles. They cannot go with the food distribution system run by military contractors, which has been organized by one of the warring sides. And Israel, of course, is regarded as the occupying power in Gaza. So they say they cannot go back on their principles, but they are ready to distribute aid. They talk about thousands of trucks that are ready, packed with food and medicine and other supplies that they're ready to distribute. Israel, of course, accuses the UN of not doing their job and saying, why aren't you distributing the food? This week there was drone footage of how many UN vehicles were lined up at the crossing points, to which the aid agencies, when we ask them, they say, well, getting from A to B is not so simple. We have to navigate this web of Israeli restrictions, also security risks, getting the drivers. The drivers have to go through areas where they come under fire when they go out into trying to distribute. So they say there's not a system in place in this current chaos for them to be able to do their job properly. And contrast this, Adam, when there was a ceasefire, which broke down months ago, when there was a ceasefire, when hundreds of trucks did come into Gaza, where the UN and other aid agencies were distributing, the black market stopped existing. The prices came down because there were no shortages.
And Anthony, the focus of the White House, though, has been on the diplomatic track and trying to get another ceasefire up and running.
Right. I think that's what the administration has been hoping for, talking about now for weeks, feeling like they are getting close to a ceasefire. And Donald Trump himself has mentioned that the chance of more hostages being released, which is part of the ceasefire negotiations. Steve Witkoff, who is Donald Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, kind of a jack of all trades in doing these diplomatic negotiations. He is traveling to Italy and having talks with Qatari officials and with Israeli officials, trying to mediate some sort of a ceasefire. And there is a certain amount of optimism still in the White House that something could be reached, but that optimism doesn't seem to be leading to any kind of a real progress, tangible breakthroughs in these negotiations, where you could open up more of Gaza to aid in exchange for a ceasefire, 60-day ceasefire, and hostages being released. It just, we feel like we're close, but it's just not getting over that final hump.
Lyse, what's your take on these talks?
There seems to be, and there has long been, three major stumbling blocks. One is agreeing on a mechanism to deliver aid, which we've just been discussing. Two is how far will Israeli forces withdraw from. There was discussion earlier that Israel agreed to withdraw, to leave its forces in 20% of the Gaza Strip, to which Hamas was saying, no, it's got to be more than that. But one of the biggest issues is that Hamas wants guarantees that there's not just going to be a 60-day ceasefire, that there is going to be an end to the war. It has often offered to release all of the hostages as long as the war ends, because what it doesn't want for there to be a pause and then for the war to resume. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been accused by his critics that he's just simply prolonging the war in order to ensure his own political survival. He denies that, saying that and his military chiefs say this as well, the job of defeating Hamas, destroying Hamas, is the word that they use, has still not been achieved. But it has to be said that top Israeli generals were saying last year that they did all they could militarily, and that the priority now had to be a political deal to bring the hostages home. So what we understand, as Anthony said, we've heard so many times, including from President Trump, that they are so close, and they are very close. They often say it's 90% done. And what they're arguing about now is those percentages. The last I read before I joined you is that Hamas still doesn't think there's enough of a guarantee that the war will end. There's conflicting, as we record, and what time is it now? It's 4:15 in London. That the reports were that Prime Minister Netanyahu had called the Israeli delegation back from Qatar, where the negotiations had been taking place, and that led to an outcry from the hostage families saying, don't, keep talking. We want our loved ones to come home. But as Anthony said, we understand there is going to be this meeting in Italy between Ron Dermer, a key confidant of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that's crucial, Steve Witkoff, the envoy for everything, including this track, as well as the Prime Minister of Qatar, who's played an absolutely crucial role in these indirect talks. So that's at a very high level. And the pressure of this, the fact that there's so much attention now on the humanitarian crisis, that's adding something else in it. But they're just simply, some of it is irreconcilable unless everyone is sort of saying, let's just go to the 60-day ceasefire. Let's bring at least some of the hostages home. And of course, Hamas wants Palestinian prisoners in exchange. And that's a very sensitive issue for Israel.
And Anthony, we started this episode by talking about the growing number of statements from governments, from organizations, from media organizations about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Does that make any difference to the conversation in the United States?
It does not seem to be breaking through here right now. I mean, you do see advocacy organizations issue these reports and these dire warnings, and that does get coverage here in the United States. But when you talk to members of the administration, they are more focused on saying, well, Hamas is at fault here. If there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, it is because Hamas is not is creating it. I think there is, however, frustration with the Israelis and Benjamin Netanyahu, but it's not really focused on Gaza. It's more focused on what they see as the continued actions of Israel in Syria, the bombing campaigns, where Trump and the administration is trying to get a ceasefire to hold there. And there have been on background criticisms of Netanyahu saying all he wants to do is bomb, and he's kind of a madman, and he's doing this for his political survival, and he's complicating the situation in the region by continuing to press ahead with military actions. But you don't hear as much about the humanitarian concerns. compared to what you're hearing about what Netanyahu is doing militarily. It is this administration's belief, hope maybe, that a 60-day ceasefire will give both sides the space to reach some sort of a permanent peace in the region. But as Lyse mentioned, we've had 2 ceasefires already, and the Israelis have ultimately ended those ceasefires with new military action. So while the administration is saying this time this will help lead to a permanent peace, they haven't given a whole lot of details on how those negotiations might ultimately resolve.
Right, Lyse, I know you've got 1,001 other things to do, so I'm going to let you go, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Anthony, there's been quite a lot of American domestic politics today. What is the latest on these claims about Jeffrey Epstein? And of course, Jeffrey Epstein was this financier and convicted sex offender who was awaiting trial for sex trafficking when he took his own life in prison in 2019. And actually his ex-partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, looks like she might be having some meetings with law enforcement soon at a sort of official level. But there are, at the moment, more reports about Donald Trump's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein when he was alive.
Right. If you remember last week, the Wall Street Journal issued that report about a letter that Trump allegedly sent, a birthday card Trump allegedly sent to Jeffrey Epstein in the early 2000s, and that generated a considerable amount of attention and controversy and led to a lawsuit that Donald Trump has filed against the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. Well, the Journal is pressing ahead, and they had a news story on Wednesday night about how, as you mentioned, these Epstein files apparently contained, in several instances, Donald Trump's name, among many other names, the story did point out. And not only that, the Justice Department had informed Donald Trump weeks ago that his name was included in these files. Then that's noteworthy because Trump was asked by reporters earlier this month about whether he had been told whether his name was in the Epstein files, and he had denied it and said that everything was a hoax perpetrated by his political enemies like Barack Obama and former FBI Director James Comey and Joe Biden to frame him, to undo him politically. So this story keeps moving along, and there are new developments and new pieces that keep falling into place, and that's why it has been so hard for the administration to shake this story and move on to something else where they feel better equipped to handle.
And also, is there an element to this that's rather than just being journalistic or people making claims and allegations, a sort of more kind of formal political way of getting at this?
I mean, there have been efforts in Congress to subpoena the Epstein files, to call Ghislaine Maxwell in to testify, or at least to depose her in prison, to be able to get some information, ask some questions out of her as part of an investigation. Actually, the Democrats have been attempting to amend key pieces of legislation in committee to require to have a requirement that the Epstein files be released to Congress, and that has ground things in Congress actually to a halt, to the point where they can't do any business on the floor of the House because Republicans don't want these amendments to be voted on. They don't want to, because this issue divides the Republicans so much, they don't want to handle it. So the House of Representatives actually has adjourned early for its summer recess. They're going to be gone all of August, and they won't be back until September. So they're washing their hands of this, running out of town essentially to avoid this. Meanwhile, the Justice Department apparently is having a meeting. Lawyers with the Justice Department are having a meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida, in her prison, to also ask her questions and get her side of the story. So there are wheels turning on this, although it's still difficult to see exactly what new information we could get and when.
I mean, I love the idea of them going off on holiday to sort of stop the clock. Also, how's this going with the MAGA base? Because when I was chatting to Katrina about it a few weeks ago or a few episodes ago, sounded like Donald Trump was getting a lot of heat from his supporters, and actually he was distancing himself from them at one point.
This is an issue that the MAGA base, the kind of right wing, particularly online influencers and commentators have been focused on for quite some time because they believe Jeffrey Epstein does have connections or did have connections to the wealthy and powerful, and that in their view there is enough to investigate about whether he connected these people to underage prostitutes, underage girls that he was consorting with, and so they view a larger conspiracy here. They didn't directly believe that Trump was involved in it, but now that the Trump administration has not been quite as forthcoming in providing all of the information about Epstein, they're starting to clamor for more, and it is getting to the point where some of them are wondering why Donald Trump, despite promising to release the Epstein files, hasn't done so. Remember, these Epstein files are documents that have been acquired over the federal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein that dates back 20 years even, but resulted in his second arrest in 2019, I believe. Things like documents that were found in his homes, video evidence, documents about his contacts and connections to all sorts of different people. So we don't really know exactly what's in the Epstein files, quote unquote, but it could shed more light on the relationships that Jeffrey Epstein had with the wealthy and powerful. And I'll add that it looked like for a little while that maybe the base was rallying back behind Donald Trump when this original Wall Street Journal story came out, and Trump was condemning the mainstream press and the fake news for trying to frame him. You saw some of the people who had been calling for more forthcoming release of documents in the administration saying, well, this story is fake, and we believe that it's a fraud out to get Donald Trump. And for a little while, it looked like maybe this was going to be an us against them scenario like we had seen in the past. But then this week, it's gotten back to Trump hearing from his base, and these news stories have come out that have kept the pressure on the administration and kept many of his supporters wondering what the administration might have to hide.
And I mean, also, we should just say the Wall Street Journal is also saying that appearing in the documents was not a sign of any wrongdoing by Trump, which is one of the caveats they put on their reporting. Right. Shall we open the Newscast American TV guide for a couple of minutes, Anthony?
Why not?
Because there's some TV-related stories to talk about today. So the first one is a show called The Late Show, hosted by Stephen Colbert, but it's the late show in the sense of it's not going to be around for much longer, even though the Late Show is actually a TV show somewhere else. Anyway, I digress.
Well, as you implied there, it's been canceled. It's been canceled by CBS, the company, the broadcast network that airs The Late Show and has aired The Late Show for about 30 years. There was an announcement made by CBS and its parent company Paramount and by Colbert, confirmed by Colbert in the recording of his show later that day, saying that it was Colbert was not just being removed from The Late Show, but the entire show is being canceled when Colbert's contract expires next year. So it's going to be on air until, I believe, next May of 2026, but it will not be renewed, and there is going to be no late programming, late talk show on CBS. You have to remember that the late night talk shows are kind of an institution in the United States and have been for quite some time. The NBC's show, The Tonight Show, back when Johnny Carson hosted it in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, that was kind of a fixture of American television habits. It would get 10 million viewers every episode for the peak ones where they had special entertainment guests. It would touch on political topics as well and cultural topics. It really was a lodestone. The Late Show was CBS's competitor in the 90s. The Tonight Show still continues on, but for a long time it was what people watched in the evenings, and viewing habits have changed, and Paramount says this decision was made because the Late Show was losing tens of millions of dollars and that they needed to cut their losses eventually. But I mean, there is still a lot of people look at this and say, well, Colbert was a big critic of Donald Trump, one of the most prominent critics of Donald Trump in late night programming, and Paramount just having settled a lawsuit against 60 Minutes and CBS. This was maybe another string attached to get rid of a comedian who was a thorn in Donald Trump's side.
Right. One more TV show to talk about, though, the return of South Park, and it has come back in America with an absolute bang, which is also just related to what we were just talking about with The Late Show.
This was one that was also in contract negotiations. South Park, an animated comedy show that does have also political overtones, political criticisms. It's about a bunch of kids who live in a Colorado mountain town, but it's been around since, probably the 90s as well. It is a fixture on Comedy Central, one of the few pieces of original programming that Comedy Central, which actually was where Colbert got his start on the Daily Show on Comedy Central as well. But it's a fixture of their programming, so it's a boon for them to get this contract renewed. But it's also indicative of the challenges that television, commercial television, linear television, as you call it, where you sit down and watch program after program that airs at a specific time every week or every day. The challenges that are facing them because ratings are down and the audience just isn't there for original programming. So it's a lot harder to get kind of original non-sports related programming to get it to make money on television these days.
And yeah, Anthony, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen this episode of South Park, the return of South Park, but it has a lot of very anti-Donald Trump satirical stuff that includes nudity of Donald Trump and nudity of Donald Trump in a bed with Satan, and lots of jokes about Donald Trump is going to sue us at South Park. So they are clearly, the founders of South Park, inserting themselves into that conversation about Donald Trump and the media.
Yeah, and I'll mention that the Comedy Central, the network that's airing it, is owned by Paramount also. So they have their experience with being sued by Donald Trump and the consequences of criticizing Donald Trump. So yeah, they've always got to push the edge on that show. Satan is a returning character. I remember there was a movie where Saddam Hussein was in bed with Satan on South Park, and so yeah, this is I think they're trying to get Trump's attention and trying to poke him in the eye a little bit. It certainly might not be the kind of attention that the corporate owners of Comedy Central would want.
Anthony, good to catch up with you.
My pleasure. Good to chat with you.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast, apart from to say the next episode of Newscast will be coming to you from a tent, at least I hope there's a tent, because it might be raining, at the Latitude Festival in Suffolk, which isn't just music, it's also talks and events and things as well. And we thought we would continue our summer tour by popping in to see what was going on there. And Chris and I will both be there with, I'm looking over at my colleagues, a special guest, if we've remembered to book one. I'm getting a thumbs up. And if we haven't, there'll be even more chance for the audience to ask questions. And if you're there, we're looking forward to seeing you. And if you're not, don't worry, you'll be able to hear the episode in the Newscast feed as usual. Thanks very much for listening to this one, though. Bye-bye.